What's up, world? eCushion is here, tapping in for lesson number 3 of free lessons for all ages and all levels, hosted by NGO Radio Terra. So shout out to them. They are located down in Brazil, and we love having this international conglomeracy of great musicians and educators looking to link up all over the world through the internet and shed some light on some of these techniques and some of the beauty of music and just sharing thoughts and experiences. And that's what these lessons are all really about. We try and cram as much as we possibly can into 30 minutes. So today I'm going to show you a bit of my recording process. I'm going to take you through a real-time scenario of someone sending me a track to record some drums on, and I'm going to attain some drum sounds. I'm going to be talking about drum triggers. I'm going to be talking about mic technique, which includes placement and volume. I'm going to be talking about what I have here in the studio, and ultimately recording and anything that you do with music is all about what you have, making do with what you have, where you are, when you have it. We don't always have all the things that we want. We don't always have the best gear. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. In this particular case, I have an amalgamation of some pretty good gear and some mid-level gear, and I've been getting some great sounds out of it. Ultimately, when it comes to recording and it comes to being in the studio, and this is actually also about live, but it's really about in the studio. It's how you track it in. It's all about, is what you're playing in through these mics quality enough for you to keep? If we have to edit things and put plugins on things and tuck things so much so that it starts to become more about that process than actually playing, then we know that probably that take wasn't good enough. We want to make sure that we don't try and, as we say, polish a turd at the very end of our recording process, which means that we take good care on the front end, which means checking our levels and making sure all our things are working right and making sure that we're comfortable in our seat so that when we do finally press record, even if we do make a lot of takes, which is part of the recording process, right? It doesn't always happen in one take, but even if we do take a lot of takes, we don't have to stop and reset. And it's all about conserving your energy, and it's all about being efficient in the studio as well. So again, these are things that I would like to impart about my process, and let's get into it, seeing as how we already have. So he also goes by James Osell. He is a fantastic songwriter, guitarist, vocalist. I grew up with this person, and it's not just because we have history that I really, really love this song, but I fell in love with the song that he sent me to play some drums to. So I'd like to use that structure for the educational purposes of today's class. He sent me a track that had a vocal and guitar part, and then he had a drum stem that was probably generated from Studio Drummer, or he programmed it himself, but it was most likely a programmed computerized drum part, quantized, but sounded really good. And if it was somebody else's live drums, then wow, they did a good job. But I definitely think that it was programmed. So I took that idea. But only death gives it meaning. I'm gonna recreate this drum part now for you and break down some of the rhythms. I'm going to talk about why I did certain things, and I'm also going to demonstrate my kick trigger, and I'm going to show you a couple things about what's different in this moment than when I recorded that last initial and final take. So here we go. amalgamation of a pop slash hip hop groove. And for the hip hop groove, I'm sort of referencing Spotty Dopalicious, which is different than what I'm playing here. But Spotty Dopalicious is sort of like. This is more like. But the bass drum sound that I'm playing with is actually a digital kick sound, and it's somewhat in that southern hip hop vein. Something I knew that would cut through and give that hip hop sensibility, while the pattern on top is somewhere between like a Taylor Swift style beat and an Outkast beat. Now, another aspect to my drum recording technique is sometimes I choose to play not a lot of crash cymbals during the recording process because the microphone system in an acoustic drum tracking room won't allow for complete and total isolation. So if I want to move a crash cymbal or turn a crash cymbal down, I don't have as much flexibility as if it were on another channel by itself. Because remember, the floor tom mic picked up the crash too. Every single mic in the room picks everything else up. So I have to be very intentional and deliberate about what I play. Sometimes I play only the crashes that matter to my groove sensibility. In other words, any crash that might affect me playing it more in the pocket, I'll play that crash. But I won't play other auxiliary crashes that I can always program later. And when I say program later, I mean I could go through and literally just hit the crash cymbal wherever it needs to be in the track, or I can go ahead and program in a crash cymbal in battery or on an MPC or an SP404 and like that. One of my favorite parts about using a digital kick in the recording process is that at least if I need to move the kick somewhere, right? Let's say the kick was a little bit late, but everything else was on. At least I have total isolation with the kick. And that makes a huge difference in the long run when in the post-production process, you want to have more flexibility. More flexibility, more flexibility. I cannot stress that enough. I want to explain this final groove, which is somewhere between a dance hall and a reggaeton beat. A good friend of mine plays for Sean Paul, and he described authentic dance hall as simply two variations. Or I decided to kind of mix in reggaeton, which has 4 on the floor. And I decided to keep this little shaker thing on the hi-hat going. So I mixed the two. Or and then finally, I want to talk about my body mechanics. When I'm recording with the click track, I always try and keep my right hand going with the click so that I can stay inside of the pocket as much as possible. Hence, when I come over here to the tambourine part, I keep my right hand going. And then my fill is going to also be right hand driven.
Once you pop, you can't stop. Once you get to the pocket, you gotta rock it.
Lastly, just know that the studio process is a layering process. So the reason why I don't always record the crashes is because I want to have the most isolation. I want to have the most control over moving things and making things the volume that I want them at as possible. And so we're going to make sure that we leave some room, let's say, in recording the drum part, unless we're playing fusion, unless we're playing stuff that requires us to play in the moment those exact fills and that amount of drums. But if we're recording a pop record or recording a groove record, something that we can layer, leave some room so that you can act like a programmer. As a drummer, I act like I'm still playing an MPC. I'm going to use the kick, snare, and hat, and maybe play some crash cymbals, but ultimately I'm going to not play all those toms. I'm not going to play all those cymbals that I would play in a live setting, right? Because I can get this time back. I have the time. I'm in the studio. Live, you can't get that time back. So you have to play in the moment what you need and what you want. But in the studio, we can layer, we can wait to the next take. So that's why I don't always play as many crash cymbals or fills in that initial drum set take, because I want to utilize as much isolation and control as possible. Another recording aspect I want to discuss real quick is mic angle and mics in general. I've got kind of a hodgepodge of microphones going right now. As you can see, I actually have microphones on the overheads, which aren't even supposed to be used for overhead mics. But again, we're using what we have, when we have it, where we are. This right here is a room tester mic. So this was a super cheap mic, about 30 bucks. It's super flat and it really tells the truth. Not very dynamic though. This one right here is a handheld condenser microphone made by Sennheiser, and this is an E835. It's really great for vocals, and in general it picks up things really, really well. I also have Icon drum mics right here, the DM1s on the toms, and I have an SM58 on the floor tom, and then I have a SM57 on the snare. I have a D112 in the bass drum, and this particular lesson I didn't use the D112 or the bass drum. I used a KT10 kit trigger. I used a KT10 kick trigger, excuse me. Mic placement's really, really important. I'm going to show you right now that this drum mic right here, if it were placed 1/4 of an inch closer towards the camera, it would sound completely different than where it is right now, which is kind of away from the rim. So in other words, if it was like somewhere over here, it would sound much thuddier. So 1/4 of an inch can make a massive difference in your drum sound. Remember that. And lastly, I want to address the subject of time, groove, and placement in terms of playing with the click track. The goal is to sync with the click so that when the editing process comes, when they have to line up timpanis and random glockenspiels and guitar parts and vocals, that your drums are not the issue. Let them slide everything else around your somewhat perfect drum part. And I say perfect as an approximation because you are negotiating the groove between the bass part and the guitar part and the keys part and the percussion parts, and everything else is affecting what the drummer does. So it's really important that when you send in your drum parts, they're as lined up as possible. When I play with the click, I'm aiming to be as centered with the click as possible, but if one bass drum is slightly ahead or slightly behind the one, or whatever beat it's supposed to be on, as long as the next 10 of them aren't off, I'm gonna let that one rock, because the end result, there's no click track in the song. And as long as it feels great without the click, then that's all we're looking for. And chances are, if you're playing with the click track, everything else is going to line up much smoother. Everything else is going to groove. The drums really need to be directly in the center of the beat, or they need to be off in a consistent way, in a loop, in such a way that everything else still feels great around that, if that makes sense. So don't worry about being perfect, but make sure that your margin of error is as little as possible. Get as many beats in the center as you can, and then everything else will fall into place. And your editing time on the end, because listen, sometimes I do edit myself, but your editing time will be minimal because you played it so well the first time. Thanks so much. Want to give a big shout out to Tamboro Drums, Proel, Icon Mics, Roland Corporation, and everybody that supports NGO Radio Terra. Thank you so much for having me. And this has been Lesson 3. This is a journey into the studio process. And we were discussing James Ocell's Harp in the Fire. Thank you.